the University of Arizona BIO5 Institute, we bring together hundreds of multifaceted experts that include world-class bioscientists, engineers, physicians, and computational researchers. This team science approach is designed to ignite creative solutions to the many complex biological challenges facing our families and communities, and has resulted in disease prevention strategies, promising new therapies, innovative diagnostics and devices, and improved food sustainability.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Science Talks, a conversation hosted by the University of Arizona's BIO5 Institute. My name is Amy Randall Barber.
And I'm Brittany Ullorn.
Neuropsychiatric illnesses are mental disorders, which include schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depressive disorder. These illnesses are rooted in identifiable problems within the brain. They are complex conditions whose origins aren't well understood, and they are the leading cause of disability in the United States. Today, we are joined by physician scientist, Dr. Amelia Gallitano. Dr. Gallitano is the Director of Women in Medicine and Science in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, Phoenix, as well as a professor of basic medical sciences, psychiatry, and neuroscience, and is a member of the BIO5 Institute. She is a board-certified psychiatrist who studies how the environment interacts with genes to influence risk for neuropsychiatric illnesses. Dr. Gallitano, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So you're both a psychiatry specialist and a researcher. What led you to this dual career path?
Well, I got interested in this path way back in high school. I have always been curious about what makes people tick. My personal feeling is that period of adolescence, being, pre-high school and high school, is a really difficult time in life when you have so many things to deal with. It's emotionally a challenging time. You're dealing with issues of independence from your family and your parents versus, still needing other people. And it's definitely a period of angst and anxiety. How do I fit in socially? So I think I was seeing a lot of this in my friends and myself, and just really curious about, what caused that and what I could do to help make this period of challenging period of life easier for people. So, really wanted to do something about that in my career. At the same time, I was taking AP biology in my junior year of high school, and I remember when we studied the brain, and this was still very early on when we didn't know that much, not nearly what we know now, and we hadn't even invented the term neuroscience yet. But I read an article in just a science publication for the lay audience about sleep and dreaming. And in it, the author of the article hypothesized that the content of your dreams might be influenced by the body's physical state. So for example, often in a dream, you feel like there's something scary happens and you need to run away, and suddenly you're frozen and you can't move. Well, it turns out that the body is actually in a state of paralysis during REM sleep, which is evolutionarily, you can imagine, beneficial because we don't get up and act out our dreams. So they were hypothesizing maybe this experience that you have in your dreams has something to do with that. And I thought, wow, that is really cool that something like your dreams or thoughts or emotions, they're actually a product of what's happening of physical substance in the brain. And so that was the beginning.
Wonderful.
My curiosity about, what is it in the brain that creates things like our thoughts and our emotions and creativity and things like that.
That's very inspiring. Often it does start with curiosity.
So I'm curious, at what point did you decide to pursue, being both a clinician and doing research?
Well, I think I had ideas about both, starting way back then. I chose where I went to college because I knew I would have the opportunity to get involved in research as an undergraduate. And there were people in the Department of Behavioral Science that studied biopsychology. And so that's what I wanted to do. And by the end of college, I had to make this decision. Do I want to do something to help patients. My father was a physician, and I think that he was a huge inspiration for me in life. And I still had this desire to help people that were, suffering from mental illness, or even just, the normal anxieties and angst that we all can experience. And yet I also really loved trying to understand better what was going on in the brain and the whole process of research. So it was at the end of medical school that I decided, I wanted to apply to MD, PhD programs to really keep open the option of doing both with my career.
That makes a lot of sense. So fast forward, from high school through your undergraduate and then your MD, PhD training to where you are today. Can you tell us a bit about some of your current research projects? Sure. So I have a basic science laboratory. We study the role of a certain family of genes that are activated in the brain in response to events that happen in the outside world, so environmental events. And these genes, they're the first ones to be turned on or stimulated, expressed in neurons in response to events like stress, but even just events like our interaction today. So for us to be able to remember tomorrow, I remember that I had this conversation with the folks at BIO5, something has to change in my brain to make that experience encoded in a long-term fashion. And so these genes play an important role in those processes of synaptic plasticity and memory formation. And I had hypothesized that because these genes sort of are at this nexus between what's going on in the outside world and long-term changes in the brain that have been implicated in risk for mental illnesses, things like memory and synaptic plasticity and cognition that are abnormal or dysfunctional in patients with mental illness. I had hypothesized that these genes could potentially play a role mediating the genetic and environmental contributions to risk for mental illness, because mental illnesses aren't caused by genes alone or by just environment. It's both factors, genes and environment, and we still don't understand how those two predispositions or risk factors interact to result in the symptoms of mental illness. But we're learning more about it all the time. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. How you kind of describe there is this, unmet, or not unmet, but just this gap in knowledge of how the environment and genes are interacting to influence mental illness. And so I think it's really fascinating. In terms of, I didn't answer your question on projects. Oh, yes, go ahead. So what are you currently studying? Yes, thanks. So we have basic science projects that are focused on trying to identify what genes are regulated downstream of these genes that I study. So this family of genes act as something called transcription factors, which means that the proteins that they encode bind to DNA and turn on and off other genes. So if indeed they play a critical role in translating environmental events into changes in the brain, then the genes that they are regulating must be playing important roles in that next step of turning these processes, these events, into the changes in the brain that represent memory, for example. So much of our work focuses on that, and we've used a number of different methods and identified one downstream target of the family of genes we study is the serotonin 2A receptor. And we recently had a publication on that, which we're really excited about. What we found was that an environmental stimulus, sleep deprivation, so keeping a mouse, for example, awake for 6 hours can upregulate expression of the serotonin 2A receptor in the brain, both at the mRNA level and at the protein level. And this is really exciting because that's much faster than we would have predicted for just a physiologic stimulus, something that we can all experience when we stay up late writing a paper, for example, or watching Netflix, or we travel internationally. And why is this important? Well, this receptor is the site of action of psychedelic drugs, which change perception. And these are a set of drugs like LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline are some of the drugs, but psilocybin in particular is being investigated as a potential therapeutic to enhance other types of therapy to treat a range of mental illnesses. So it's a kind of exciting time for that. A second part of our research focus is on human clinical studies that we've begun. So we call this translational research, where we've taken our findings from our basic science studies and translated them to humans. And we've now have an ongoing clinical trial to test what we hope may become a biologically based test to diagnose schizophrenia. So we're excited about that because right now we don't have any biomarkers for any mental illness. We have to diagnose them simply based on a patient's reports of symptoms that they're having.
Right, and I'm sure those could be, subjective or different between patients. Just, thinking of the way that, people experience pain, for example, people would rate them on a different scale, but if you're actually looking at a physiological parameter, that would better help to understand that. So I could see how that's the same with mental illness. It'd be better to have some kind of biomarker to help diagnose those conditions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So how does your experience as a psychiatrist influence or benefit your research?
Yeah, so I can point to really the first time that happened for me, and that was when I was doing studies as a postdoc on animals that were missing one of these genes that I talked about, this family of immediate early gene transcription factors. The gene that we mostly study is one called EGR3, early growth response 3. And so I had hypothesized as I was describing that EGR3 and other genes in the family could be playing a role in risk for mental illnesses. So we had studied the behavior of the mice and found that they had abnormal behaviors that were similar to other animal models of psychiatric illness. And then we wanted to see if we could reverse that by treating the animals with an antipsychotic. And what I saw was that the wild type animals got very sedated when we gave them a medication, clozapine, which is an antipsychotic. Whereas the animals that lacked the EGR3 gene were walking around the cage and you couldn't tell which one got drug and which one got vehicle. In contrast, the wild type animals just were completely immobile. They looked like they weren't even alive. And I thought, this is really interesting because we see something similar in patients that come into the emergency room in an acute episode of psychosis, where they can tolerate very high doses of antipsychotic medications that, when given to people that don't have schizophrenia, cause them to become completely sedated, similar to what we were seeing in animals. And that's when I realized, wow, if I didn't have my clinical training and hadn't seen this in my treatment of patients in the emergency room and in psychiatry, I don't think I would have known that. This isn't a finding that you see published in papers. It's more just clinical observation. So that sort of was the first time that I realized that my clinical training really made me recognize something in my science. And now that has formed the basis of this clinical translational study that I told you about, where we hope to develop a diagnostic for schizophrenia.
Very neat, very impactful.
That was very impactful. I actually know someone with schizophrenia, and he has just struggled. And so to have, people like you working on this it's amazing. It's hopeful. It's very hopeful for the future.
Thank you. It's a really devastating illness.
Yeah, it's really caused a lot of heartache and problems. Yeah.
For the people that are suffering from it, but also for their family members and people that care about them, and has a huge impact on our communities and on society as well.
Yeah.
As the individuals.
Yeah. So on a lighter note, you were the keynote speaker for our 2020 BIO5 Inspiring Women in STEM event. And you are the Director of Women in Medicine and Science at the College of Medicine, Phoenix. Would you talk to us about your passion in supporting women in medicine and science?
Sure. So I think I was inspired and really benefited tremendously from a similar group. When I was doing my postdoctoral research at Washington University in St. Louis, they have a group called the Academic Women's Network, and they sponsored lots of functions and talks and networking events where I met people that were really inspirational to me, and I learned a lot and got a lot of guidance. One of the very tangible things that they did was they worked together with Washington University in St. Louis to do a salary study, a faculty salary study while I was there. In fact, it had started before I arrived. And at one point early on in my postdoc, I suddenly got a very substantial raise that I didn't ask for and I hadn't expected. And was this impactful? Absolutely. How did it affect me? Well, later when I was finishing my postdoc and applying for jobs, I got a job offer. And the chairman of the department that was offering me the job was telling me how he really liked to pay people at a very high rate, and he gave great salaries. And I said, that's terrific. And when he made me the offer, it was lower than what I was already making as a senior, at that point I was an instructor, which is a pre-tenure track faculty position. And it was, if I hadn't had this experience of having this raise, I would never have known that I could ask for more. And that's an area where, there is this huge discrepancy in salaries that persists today in medicine. The AAMC has just put out a report. This is the American Association of Medical Colleges in October of 2021, saying women remain substantially underpaid compared to men in the fields of medicine and science. It's still a huge problem, and it's a problem right here at our College of Medicine. And the AAMC has really tremendously supported women in medicine and science programs. They, in fact, encourage medical schools to start these kinds of programs. And their studies, like this one, offer recommendations for promising practices to attain faculty salary equity. And I'm talking about faculty because that's really my focus, but it's true for all jobs. Women continue to be paid less than men, and for all kinds of jobs. And this is after you control for other factors like productivity. They're still paid less, and women of color are paid even less than white women. So it continues to be a major problem. How did it help me? By having a higher salary, I was able to pay for childcare for my children. And that allowed me to succeed in my job because I could, work longer hours. I could put in the work that was necessary to accomplish what I needed to get tenure and to get grants and to succeed in my career. So I'm very committed to enabling other women to have those benefits as well. We need it if we're going to succeed.
Absolutely. And I feel like we've got to support each other.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So what would you say your biggest piece of advice would be for young girls who might want to pursue a career in science or medicine?
I think I have two pieces of advice. One is follow your passion. So you don't do things because you think you should or because somebody tells you you should. Figure out what you really love. What gives you energy? What makes you excited when you get up in the morning that you're gonna have the opportunity to go do this thing? That's what you need to follow. And if it's science and medicine, that's fantastic. But it's a long haul, right? It's a lot of work, and you will encounter obstacles. You can get over all of those if this is what you really love and if it gives you energy. The second thing that I would advise is don't be afraid to ask for things, to ask for help. I have sort of the personality that I think, oh, I can do it myself. I don't need anybody to help me. You can't do it yourself, and you don't need to. And we benefit so much from interacting with others, from having a network, and you learn so much from other people. So let them help you. And you know what? Then you will be stronger and you will be in a better place to turn around and help them back when they need it.
You know, I can actually say from experience, I've lived that. Kind of recently, you know, I've always been that woman that has been like, nope, I got it. I can do it myself. When I finally realized you should probably ask for help here, or I got desperate and was like, I need help. I can't get this done. I realized that, oh, okay, that worked out really well. And I was able to like turn that around and mentor someone else, you know, going forward. So real life case here, what you just said.
And that's why something like Women in Medicine and Science has been so great, because it is a place to bring together women of similar experience. And you can do exactly that. You can be there for each other, whether that's advice. Oh, you just, you know, submitted a grant and it didn't get funded the first time. Don't worry about it. Let me tell you about all my experiences not having grants funded and what I did that finally got them funded. We can help you. We've already written these kinds of sections. Let me show you mine, and you can benefit from that. All the way to, geez, you know, my colleagues were, you know, I don't know how to handle this. I'm going to study section and my significant other is also traveling for work. And hey, you know what? Your kid can come and stay over our house tonight. Because I've got two older boys and your younger boy loves hanging out with them. And we can totally do this. No problem. Let me help you out. And then, you know what? When I'm in a difficult time, they do the same for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's so important to have that network of support, not just professionally, but also personally, because I think, you know, those things, those two worlds, especially for women, they do collide. And, you know, you were talking about before, like having the money to pay for childcare so that you could get to the next step in your career. But then if you want to go to a conference and needing someone to watch your child, like it's so intertwined. So I think it's important for women to have that support for all those aspects of their life.
Absolutely. And I do want to also mention, because often when we talk about women, we talk about childcare and things like that. Not everybody chooses to have children, but even my colleagues that don't have children, well, they have parents or aunts and uncles that they may be caring for. Or another very common thing for women in professional careers is that they may have a significant other, a spouse that doesn't have a job opportunity in the same city. Well, then they need to be able to afford a second home or a second apartment and to be able to fly between two different cities. So it's not only about, you know, children and supporting them, although that is a very important thing. But, you know, even if you haven't chosen to have children, you still may have challenges that your male colleagues may not have.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Well, we love to think of our researchers and our scientists and clinicians as superheroes. So we like to end this podcast with a fun question. So we'd like to know, if you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
Yeah, that's a kind of a tough question, but I think my superpower would be to inspire others. So I think it's so important, because having somebody believe in you is, I think, critical for your success. And so the ability to inspire somebody and say, you can do this, you You need to believe in yourself. I believe in you. If you have questions, just think back to the fact that I am here and I believe you can do it. And that can give them the power to go on. And I like to do this even in lab meetings. For my lab, we have trainees all the way from high school students that come in to do internships, undergraduate, graduate students, and postdoctoral trainees, all the way through the different levels. But even if you are a brand new volunteer in the lab and you're just doing a very small, what may seem like a very mundane task of pipetting or genotyping animals, for example, I like to talk about how important that particular task is, how it fits into the larger experiment, and how that experiment fits into the whole project, and what the implications are of that project for things like people with mental illness. And so inspiring people to understand the context of what they're doing, not just say, oh, come in and do this work and eventually it'll pay off. No, tell them why they're doing it. And then they get excited and they realize they're part of a team and they're making an impact. Even if it's a small step, that's the way you get started. And it requires all those steps to accomplish these large goals.
Yeah, I think what you said about, having people understand what the big impact of their work is, I think that's so important, because I know myself as a researcher, I did very basic science and, was looking at one cell signaling pathway. And so it's very easy for me to just think about, the steps in that pathway inside the cell, but I needed to remember to take a step back. And I like to teach my mentees, we are studying a virus that causes cancer, and the research that we're doing has impacts for prevention and treatment of these viral related cancers. So it's important to be able to take a step back, and that helps, like you said, inspire not only yourself, but those who you are mentoring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Gallitano, for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on another episode of Science Talks. For more information, please visit our website at bio5.org. From all of us at the BIO5 Institute, we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Science Talks. Continue the conversation with us next time as we learn more about the amazing science happening at the University of Arizona's BIO5 Institute.